Things
Right.
have
They call
changed.
it the dangerous decade. It's the 5 years prior and the 5 years after you retire because you've got, your spending habits have increased because you've done well in your career or whatever. But then when that stops, not cold turkey, you hope you have a pension or something, but then it takes a long time to shift your habits, right? You're used
Yeah.
to having these things and doing these things. And a lot of people are finding out, yes, they love retirement, but there's only so much golf you can play.
Right.
And maybe you want to volunteer, maybe you want to have a second career. And so there's a lot of options out there, but it requires some thought and planning.
Hello, hello, and welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host. So excited about another show. I this year's been off such a challenging start, so I decided February 1st was actually the beginning of 2025 for me because we lost a month. It was a gap year. I decided because it felt like a year and it was a gap, and so we are starting again anew. And I hope that you are off to a good start yourself with 2025. We have a really important show today. And as you know, I brought this up before on our show. There's so much to talk about with respect to aging parents and money. And we're going to go there yet again today. And I have a wonderful guest that is going to guide us in many ways. And remember, even if you don't have aging parents or people that you're worried about taking care of, you yourself will age. And so these are things that apply to everybody. And I think it's going to be a terrific show. I hope you'll stick around because there's going to be so much information that will help you. And it's planning time. It's the beginning of the year. That's when we plan. And a lot of this will help you to understand some really smart ways to plan for yourself or others. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our guest. Nicole J. Smith is a member of the Sandwich Generation, caring for 5 children and 3 aging parents scattered across multiple states. She is a great communicator, networker, and delegator. Nicole built a team of support from friends, family members, and paid professionals to manage her mother's care. Nicole is a certified senior advisor who helps families navigate the caregiving conundrum through speaking engagements. She's also a former finance person. That isn't in her bio, but that I know. And she is going to lend a lot of great insight into not only caring, but the financial aspects of all of this. So, Nicole, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. We had a really fun conversation. I mean, I don't know if fun is the right word. It was pretty deep, but very enjoyable conversation about this topic. And the reason that I'm so passionate about having people like you on the show is that I went through my own caregiving period of a couple of years, and I'm still caregiving because I have a disabled sister who my parents took care of, and when my parents passed, she's now my responsibility. So I feel like I'm still in the world. She herself lives in a memory care, and my parents, you know how it is when you're taking care of your parents who, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of jump into how you got started with this and why you are doing the work that you're doing in this arena.
Sure. Well, it all began for me the middle of March in 2020. So my aunt, I was living in New Jersey and my mother was living in Los Angeles. And my aunt, who is my mom's older sister, asked me to go to fly to LA to go with my mom to her first neurology appointment because my aunt has been a nurse for half a century and had been kind of managing my mom's issues. And we kind of knew something was going on, but I was still clueless at this point. And so I flew to Los Angeles to go to this appointment with my mother. And 5 minutes into the appointment, I was sent out into the waiting room because my mom got mad at me and the neurologist sent me out. And then that was literally the week was shutting down for COVID. So I didn't even know if I would make it home. So that's how it all started for me.
Wow. Okay. And then, so take us on that little journey with your mom. Like what did happen after the neurologist appointment?
Yeah, well, after the neurology appointment, I did fly home and I begged my mother to come be part of our bubble in New Jersey. We offered to drive her, go out there, drive her, everything, but she refused. She loved living in Southern California and she loved her house and she had a routine, but socialization is huge in managing your brain as we age that we're learning. And so her being basically by herself for 18 months isolated during COVID really accelerated the progression of what we would discover was Alzheimer's disease with her. So she was alone and I called her quite often every few days, but that's not the same. Right. And then once the world kind of opened back up and I started traveling to see her and my aunt would travel to see her and we would get phone calls. She would threaten suicide. And there was just a whole lot going on here. And even then I still was kind of clueless about dementia and didn't really understand what was going on or what my life was going to turn into. And then middle of 21, we were out in California moving my daughter into college in San Diego. And that's kind of what sticks in my mind as things started to go sideways. And she was just cognizant enough to thwart any kind of effort we were trying to make to help her. And that's also part of dementia, which I didn't realize. Denial, paranoia. She was in her own reality, and I would get lectures from her about this is the way it's going to go. This is what I'm doing. You're interfering and get out of my life. And so many times I would fly all the way across country because I would get these panic phone calls and I would be there for probably less than 24 hours. And she would come downstairs and say, hey, great for you to be here. Thanks so much. But get the bleep out. I'm done. I mean, it was challenging.
Yeah, it's so challenging. And one of the things that I've heard you say is that it's challenging on so many levels. So there's the emotional level, obviously. There's the legal, financial level. What else? What are the ones I'm missing? It kind of runs the
medical. So what I talk about in my book is that it's the legal, the medical, the financial, and the emotional. So I talk about it as trying to learn 3 new languages simultaneously under duress because each profession has its own terms. And luckily my aunt is the medical person. So she was the interpreter. She was dealing with the portals and managing that piece. I do have a finance degree, but I kind of took a different path. But fortunately, I'm married to a CPA who was very helpful with the taxes and the accounting and the finance side of it. And then I hired an elder law attorney in Pasadena to help me with the legal logistics because something I knew nothing about, and it's very state specific. And California is like another country in and of itself. So I hired an elder law attorney immediately to try and figure out what we could do because she was refused to leave her house.
Yeah.
And even though we had powers of attorney, we had the trust, we had all the documents in place, not one of those will allow you to remove a person, their bodily person, from their home without their permission. And so then we had to explore conservatorship or what other options were, which was a whole nother massive confusion. And I didn't realize it would take 6 months. We were in crisis mode and needed something to happen in a week, not 6 months.
Right, right. I can really relate to that because I had a lot of those issues as well. And, you know, my parents couldn't really do anything. And, you know, their bills are still coming in and everything's still going on. And so, but you can't access their accounts. You can't do much of anything. And so it took me a while to get the power of attorney just to find out that the power of attorney didn't really give you all that much power. And so, you know, I think the way you're educating people around this is so important because when you're in the throes of it, you just want to tear your hair out. You don't understand. You're spending incredible amounts of time. And half the time you're not even caring for them because you're so busy with this other stuff. It's just not good. So, you know, can you give us a little insight? And for one thing, if just to back up, it's so important for all of us, you know, at any age, earlier the better, to have these things set up. The trust. I mean, one girlfriend told me, "Oh yeah, I'm a co-signer on all my mom's bank accounts," and I was not on my parents' bank accounts. And I mean, what a help that was. I mean, or would have been if I had been. I mean, she was smart enough to do this. But give us a few of the things that you learned that you would tell people to do in this regard.
Yeah, what I always tell people is get the powers of attorney for yourself. So there's two types of powers of attorney. There's one for medical and one for financial. That's the basics. But I tell people make sure you have those done for yourself and for your parents and for any children who are over 18. So I have 5 kids, 4 of them are over 18, and we're still working through that with them because they think they know everything and they don't want to be bothered with this right now. But getting those powers of attorney are very helpful. There's even some states that now have kind of a dementia power of attorney or a mental health power of attorney. So it is very confusing and it's very state specific. So the powers of attorney are pretty standard, but you do want to have an attorney draw those up, an elder law attorney and a state attorney draw those up in the state where you reside because it just allows for fewer headaches later. And the other thing I'll say is you put these, you designate beneficiaries or your agent on these documents. And typically you can put one person and or 2. And the other thing they recommend is, yes, you can put your spouse as the first, but then they also recommend maybe as the second to put someone from the next generation. Because if you're an older adult and you put your spouse and then something happens to you, then the grief enters in and you're a mess anyway. So it helps to have someone from a younger generation, a niece, a nephew as the second, because the first power of attorney, if they're a mess, and the first agent, if they're a mess and can't figure out what to do, they're not allowed to say, oh, I'm going to designate it to you. You can't defer that. Only the person creating the power of attorney document for themselves can designate who can do what. And so it's usually helpful to name 2 different people on those documents. And again, I'm not an attorney, but I highly recommend hiring an elder law attorney to create these documents. And other people will say, well, why don't I just do it on LegalZoom to save money, which is not advisable because you're paying an attorney for their expertise and just checking boxes on LegalZoom, you might end up with something that isn't what you intended, and then you'll end up with a mess and more attorney fees later down the road when you go through probate. So hire the professionals.
Yeah, thank you for that. I totally agree. You need people who know what they're doing on your side. I mean, it is so confusing, and I mean, I'm not the most brilliant person in the world, but I'm smart enough, and I couldn't understand half of what I was doing. I mean, the terminology alone is almost impossible to understand. So there were so many names for the different people and the roles and everything. And yeah, so I did have their trust attorney, who I also used for my own trust, so I knew them pretty well. And if I hadn't been able to go to them and ask these questions, I don't know.
Yeah, and not everyone needs a trust. So when we lived in California, we had a trust. When we lived in New Jersey, we dissolved the trust because it wasn't conducive to the laws and the probate and everything there. Then we moved to Arizona, we created a trust again. So it's very, very state specific, and someone who knows the state, knows the law in your state is going to hopefully guide you in the right direction. And there's all kinds of different scenarios, but they'll sit down with you, they'll understand your situation, what you're trying to do, and hopefully and there's an association for elder law attorneys that you can go to pick one.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I, what you were talking about with your mom too, that's very common where a parent will not want to help you in this. Once they maybe cross over into a different mental state or whatever, it's not like they're going to be on your side helping you to, basically make them dependent on you. And I found that with mine too. My parents had everything buttoned up, and we talked about it on a surface level. My dad was like, here's all the stuff in the file cabinet. But when they did get sick and they were faced with moving out, out of their own home, everything changes. And, it's a little late to be trying to get them on board with signing things over to you and doing all of that. And so the process was much longer than it might have been.
Right. My favorite saying is, it seems too soon until it's too late.
That's a great
saying. It's so true. And you can't, these are very highly emotional, volatile issues, and you're not going to resolve things in one conversation. It took me over 18 months to get my dad to do a will. My dad didn't have anything in place. He had stock certificates from the 80s. He had all kinds of stuff. So his whole situation was a completely different bag of worms. So I had to hire an elder law attorney in Iowa to figure that out. And it was a whole different situation.
Yeah. And really, I probably said this about every aspect of money, but the earlier you have these conversations about all of it, I mean, it's just, it's such a bizarrely taboo subject still. It doesn't even make sense anymore. We talk about
generational.
Everything.
I mean, it's generational. So most people would rather talk about sex with their teens than elder issues with their parents.
Yeah. Or money at all. I remember my parents bringing it up and wanting to kind of go over a few things about, if something should happen, and me not wanting to talk about it. Like, oh, we'll talk about that later when it's, when you're older. And when you're in the thick of it and people really need this stuff, you sort of lose some of that emotional, the feelings about it, because it becomes very practical at that point. And as much as you don't want to talk about it or whatever, all of that, like wanting to shy away from it, goes away, and you need answers. It's a weird thing. It's no longer sad. It's like super necessary that you have these conversations. So if you can kind of move that to an earlier point and just...
Yeah, and dementia was not on our radar. My parents were in their mid-70s. They were active, they were engaged, they were in the community, and then everything went sideways. And I am very practical. So I did feel some of the emotion because it's your parent, and you feel awkward asking about their personal health and their finances. And my mom was so adamant about stay out and leave me alone because the dementia, I mean, she was always a very strong-willed person,
Mhm.
and then even more so about her privacy and a protection mode. But then she would get on the phone and her computer and share all of her financial information with some customer service rep.
Mm.
Like I was the enemy, and then anybody else who would listen that was primed and ready to scam her, she was like, "Sure, I'll share. You get me. I'm gonna, I'll talk to you. I'm locked out of the room." So but that was the dementia. So
Right.
and I didn't realize that was part of it, but
Hmm.
it was scary. And then, like I said, my dad, I respect my dad. I love my dad. And, I said, I don't need the money. I don't want any money, but you need to figure out where the money's going. Give it to the cat. Like, I don't care, but I don't want to deal with probate and all the nightmare. I don't want to go through this again. I just,
Yeah.
that was selfish on my end. But I was like, we can make this easier by having these discussions.
Yes, and I do think you have to be a little selfish. As a matter of fact, I think you have a statistic on your website about caregivers dying before the person who's getting the care. And
Yeah,
can you
30,
just relay that?
30% of the time the caregiver dies first because they're stressed, they're neglecting their own health, and then that number gets higher as we age. And it's absolutely true.
That's a big number, 30%. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
I think it was an AARP study in 2018 or something. I mean, but I mean, it's out there. I'm not making it up. So.
Yeah, and it just really drives home the importance of taking care of yourself, preparing as much as you can. I mean, if there's any chance that you'll be a caregiver at some point, and you never know who you're going to care for. It could be a friend. I mean, we don't know. So it's so I have a really close friend right now taking care of both a parent and a sister who are both sick at the same time. And it, I mean, I don't even get to talk to her because she's so busy, but it's hard and it's so taxing in so many ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, that I can see where it's a problem. And I think you do have to make a conscious effort to take care of yourself. And one of the ways you take care of yourself is by finding the best ways to manage all of this, you know, financial, legal, medical stuff. Because
And it's
there's, and
expensive.
even just educating yourself. I'd never had anything to do with Medicare before. And then my parents are sick and I'm having to try to figure that out. So how do we get this education in advance so we're not so blindsided by so many weird things that show up?
Well, I mean, we have to face reality, right? Where nobody gets out of this life alive. And yes, we're busy. We're busy building careers and taking care of kids and saving and planning for retirement, but it should be another pillar in your retirement discussion because care is expensive and Medicare does not pay for long-term care. And 75% of us are going to need care. So, like it or not, you will probably be a caregiver or need caregiving sometime in the future. And it's depressing, but it's true. So, a lot of things are converging right now. The baby boomers, 10,000 people turn 65 every day. And the older baby boomers are turning 75 every day. And then because of the advancements in medicine, people don't die of a heart attack or any kind of acute incident because we have amazing healthcare that has all these procedures and all these drugs and all these protocols that keep people alive for a lot longer, but they're also a lot sicker. So we're living longer with chronic disease, with diabetes and hypertension, and smoking is also still a huge factor in health, long-term health. So all of these things are converging to put a lot of pressure on the healthcare system. So they can't keep you in the hospital. They can't keep you in skilled nursing. They're sending you home to figure it out on your own and pay for it on your own. I mean, every situation is different, but if you're a veteran, the VA has a lot of great programs. But if you don't have long-term care insurance and you don't have a plan, it's going to be a lot tougher to manage it all.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. And that planning, like, you were saying make this part of your retirement planning. I would also say make this part of your money dating protocol, because you should, if you've been listening to the show at all, I always advise you to spend a little time regularly with your money. And that, that is really a way to tackle all of these things that we might not normally take care of. We push them aside. One of these days we'll get to them. But if you're regularly setting aside some time just to look at money, think about money, take action with your money, make a plan for your money, this can be part of that. So you're looking at, how to pay off debt and how to save and how to budget and what to invest in. This too, how to prepare for these things. I mean, where would money come from to care for either my parents, looking at their situation, or for yourself? And one of the ways that you help to fund your mom's care, I'll let you discuss, because, this is something that happens. And the part of what I found interesting was how hard my parents had worked to save for retirement. But I think, at least for me, retirement meant, being able to still go out to eat and do whatever you want and travel and pay for your life. I never really thought retirement savings would be for caregiving. Like, somehow I separated those, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, the retirement savings went to that.
Right. We don't want to think about the unhappy stuff. We want to think about travel, global travel, and going to Tahiti or visiting grandkids or all these fun things but the whole retirement dynamic is shifting, right? So when Social Security and all that stuff was set up, the average retirement age was around 65, and I think the average people were only living a few years longer, and so you didn't need all this capital, you didn't need all these funds. And like I said, people died a lot quicker of acute incidents or issues where the whole paradigm has shifted. Mm-hmm. And you've got to face the tough stuff. You've got to mm-hmm. talk about it and make a plan and figure out, do you want to solo age? Do you want to age in a retirement community? Do you want to downsize? You can build an accessory dwelling unit on your child's property if the zoning allows it. The cool thing is that there's a lot of options out there, mm-hmm. but none of them are cheap or easy. You have to plan for this, and you want to do it sooner versus later, because you don't want to get the call about a fall, a scam, a car accident, or an acute incident, because trying to make all these decisions while someone's in the hospital facing hip surgery or a drug or something, you don't want to make these critical decisions in a super highly charged, scary health situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And you're right. Retirement is changing a lot. We did an episode, I think it was 150, called The Future Poor, Real Solutions for Retirement. And he did a great job of, he has a little historical film on his website to talk about how all this started, and how we were okay when it started and how different it is now and why. And it's really good to try to understand that, because a lot of, especially for those of us who are a little older, we're still carrying these ideas about retirement and old age and everything that don't apply anymore. I mean, it's just not, times have changed.
Right. They call it the dangerous decade. It's the 5 years prior and the 5 years after you retire, because you've got, your spending habits have increased because you've done well in your career or whatever. But then when that stops, not cold turkey, you hope you have a pension or something, but then it takes a long time to shift your habits, right? You're used to having these things and doing these things. And a lot of people are finding out, yes, they love retirement, but there's only so much golf you can play.
Right.
And maybe you want to volunteer, maybe you want to have a second career. And so there's a lot of options out there, but it requires some thought and planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of focus on that now, because I think people have unsuccessfully retired. And so now when people get ready to retire, they do a lot of thinking and reading and everything to figure out, okay, what's the actual plan for my retirement versus just, I think I'll just sit on the porch and drink lemonade for all day and relax. Well, you can only do that for so long too. So,
Right.
um, but yeah, I think this is really interesting because I think these like points of demarcation in our life are changing too. Like I don't have any big plans to stop working. I mean, I like my work and I don't really want to, but I could see where people, would, or maybe even I would at some point, but there'll always be things that I want to do. And it is a good idea for some of those potentially to be income generating, which, that's another.
Right. And you want to have a purpose. Like we talk about purpose and passion and all that
Hmm.
stuff. And I mean, it's it's kind of how we're wired. We want to be
Yes.
helpful and whether you volunteer. So my favorite story is so my husband was in public accounting for 35 years. And then shortly after he retired, he now works at AutoZone for $15 an hour as a battery checker counter retail guy.
I love that. Does he like it? Is it fun?
Oh my God, he loves it. Like he has always been a grease a motorhead his entire life with VW bugs and motorcycles and all that stuff. So he is right in his element.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. I mean, you're right. The purpose idea is so important, and I do think that people live more healthy, kind of well lives when they continue to have a purpose. Now, that doesn't, when things like dementia, and Alzheimer's come along, that's a whole different story. But so okay, let's. One of the how do we plan? I mean, I'm afraid when people listen to all this, it's like it's so overwhelming. They're just like, let's just turn this off. I don't know how to deal with this. So, what's an alternative to that idea? Because we don't want you to turn us off, and we do want you to be able to have a plan. One of the things that I found was when my parents got sick, my parents' financial planner was very helpful to me. I didn't think of her as that kind of planner. She was, mostly their advisor for their investments, but we did take a fresh look at everything with their new situation in mind and she was very helpful, and they had resources actually at their investment firm that I wouldn't have known existed. So there are lots of places to get help, and I know you offer help. So how do we break this down into some manageable pieces to do this?
Right. Well, it all starts with a conversation. So you have to approach the subject with your parents or your loved ones. And I advise don't bring it up at the Thanksgiving table when everyone's already on high family drama alert. So now's a good time to start, right? The holidays are over and just make a point to introduce the conversation. Say, hey, I'm I'm going to come visit, or I want us to talk, or we can have a family Zoom, but you need to open the door for this conversation. And it's not easy, right? This baby boomer generation is everything is close to the vest. But the statistics or the word on the street is that the older generation, the two things that they want is they do not want to be a burden to their children,
Yeah.
and they want to leave them a little nest egg if they
Yeah.
can.
Hmm.
And both of those things go right out the window when someone has a stroke, a heart attack, breaks a hip, or has a major accident. So, and it happens so much. So you have to prioritize these conversations and open the door. There's several websites. There's deathoverdinner.org that
Wow.
kind of guides you how to have this conversation. There's the conversationproject.org. There, the fivewishes.org. So there are resources out there to kind of help you navigate how to begin this. And then the other thing I'll say is just be careful of your language. So you don't want to be accusatory. So, hey, mom, dad, we're worried about you. You're not paying attention. You shouldn't be driving. You shouldn't be living alone. You need to move. So we don't want the accusatory you language. You want to do the inclusive language about I love you, I'm worried about you, I want to make sure I do what you want and help you achieve your elder years and live those out the way you want to, and I want us to do it together. So a lot of we language, love, concern, and and just be prepared because the whole sibling dynamic, it's never fun. So,
Oof, yeah, the sibling dynamic. I know that's a big one. I haven't heard a person yet talk about this. Maybe one person where it seemed to be going pretty well, but only one. I mean, it,
right, because if you call this meeting, then Brother Joe's gonna be like, "Oh, you just want all the money." And I've had my own experience with the family dynamic. So, and a lot of the only children, the only daughters, will
yeah.
be really upset that they're the only one. I'm like, well, sometimes a sibling makes it 10 times worse. So, we're all dealing with our own stuff.
Yeah, and you really have to manage expectations too, because, there's usually everybody doesn't live in the vicinity of the person. And so there'll be some who are far away and can't help as much, but they can't. I was the close one, so I knew what it felt like for everything to fall on me. But in all fairness, everybody can't just immediately drop their jobs and their kids and move to wherever the person is. So it's complicated.
Right.
And
And if someone lives far away, but they are good at finance or legal or whatever, there's so much we can do remotely so they can manage that part. And then you have someone that's boots on the ground, kind of checking in. And
mhm,
then the other siblings can come in to provide respite for that
mhm.
caregiver. And then they get a firsthand feel for what's really going on and what really is involved in
Yeah.
caregiving. And for those who really don't have anyone near mom or dad, there's aging life care managers. I mean, they're private
Mhm.
pay, but they know the system. They know social workers, nurses, hospitals, care facilities. So they just even an initial meeting with an aging life care manager in the town where your loved one lives is golden for creating a plan. So if you don't even want to touch any of this, find an aging life care manager to kind of start the conversation for you.
Wow, that's a great tip. And are those people, so they're private sort of
Typically
advisors?
private pay.
Okay.
And so a lot of these people are nurses or geriatrician, I'm sorry, gerontologists, nurses, social workers who've been in the system for a long time, and then they've gotten this certification to become an aging life care manager. And where I recently got my certified senior advisor certification, but that's more of a layperson certification. It was a 3-day course, a test, exam, all that, which was great. But and I can kind of do the same thing, but I don't have the medical background or the social work background that a lot of these other care managers have. So I mean, we all kind of do the same stuff, but at different levels of expertise.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Any help, because otherwise you're just scrambling. You're on Google, you're talking to your friends, you're just trying to piece together a whole, and you're not really speaking to an expert necessarily. And I don't know. I think that's a great option. I think the more people, I mean, I would literally grab people in the Trader Joe's line and I'd mention something and they'd tell me about, oh gosh, going through the same thing, and we'd share everything, in the 5 minutes to get to the checkout. And people need to talk about this, especially when I mean, they need a friendly person who can commiserate and understand. They also need advice so badly. So that's a great tip. And tell us a little about your book.
Sure. So my book, Diagnosis Dementia, Your Guide for Elder Care Planning and Crisis Management. So my whole thing was figuring out the legal, the medical, the financial, the emotional, and breaks it down. So it's part memoir and part prescriptive resource book. So I talk about what happened with my mom, what happened with my dad, what happened with my stepmom, and different aspects of it. The driving, oh my gosh, driving is such a huge issue, taking away their
Oh,
driver's license. So
yes.
there's all these issues that you might deal with or might not deal with, but ours was so chaotic on every level. But we figured out how to manage it all, and I started listening to podcasts. I started watching movies. I started going to webinars. I read so many books, and so because throughout this process, I just kept learning, and I'm still learning every day. I learn more all the time, and I broke it down for you to be able, it's very thin. You can stick it in your pocketbook or your purse. So if you're in the waiting room at the doctor's office with your loved one and you just want to knock out a chapter or turn to that page, I hired a professional editor to organize it in a way that is very clear. It's very informative, and also it's got a lot of drama just from our story. Like it reads like a suspense novel sometimes.
Oh, that's great. And I'm assuming that even without the dementia component, it's valuable for people who,
Yes, that's the elder care. Yes, because
yeah.
I talk about all the acronyms. Like I said, you're learning all these all this new terminology. You have no idea what it means, and acronyms are just crazy no matter what profession you're in. So I kind of break down the acronyms, the medical, the legal, the financial, and where to go to find a financial planner, a certified financial planner, a certified elder law attorney. So pointing you to the resources that you can trust. And then my other favorite resource, like you said, we're not alone caregiving. And the minute you bring it up to someone, 9 times out of 10, someone's going through the same thing. So you are not alone. And so daughterhood.org is where I lead a support group once a month with another caregiver leader. And
Oh,
Daughterhood they have support groups online, free, all month long, every week, for you to commiserate and talk with other caregivers. But they also have specific circles that focus on elder law and finance and boundaries and grief. So you just go to daughterhood.org and sign up for a circle and you'll find your people.
mm, that is great. I love that. And you know, I it is it it would have been comforting to have a lot of these other conversations in advance, to even simple things like um, I mean, it was sort of a given that my parents would want to stay home if they could. So they both went into the hospital, both came out of the hospital, and they were home. That didn't work out at all. We had 24-hour caregivers, but that home was not set up for, I mean, people who were immobile or anything else. And so it I wish we'd had more conversations about what they would have wanted in many areas, because I had to just guess. And as you've been talking about, when you're having these conversations when they're in that state, they're they're confused, they're mad, they don't want any of this even happening, they're in denial, so it's not a good time to try to get to. But it's very comforting if you have some of their wishes, for all kinds of things. And so um,
Yeah, and know where things are. Know where. So one of my financial planner friends told me this person had their elder relative who was um, was dying, and they asked, well, where are the wills? Where's this note? Oh, no, all my important papers are in the safe right here. All my important papers. They had the combination. All my important papers. So when that person died and they opened up the safe, the important papers were newspaper clippings from the 40s that were important that they saved.
oh,
That was the important papers, newspapers.
wow, okay, yeah,
So you
that's
need to just like confirm, clarify, and verify. And I know it's hard because you just don't want to keep prying, but as you begin this process and begin to get more comfortable, you you need to dig.
You just brought up the best point. And when I look back, I'm like, this is it's the things that we just don't even think about that are so simple in the moment. My dad would always point to that file cabinet. Everything was in the file cabinet, but I never looked in the file cabinet until I needed it. And if I'd just gone through that stuff with him, just even one time, like the long-term care insurance was in there, but it was all old and, ancient paperwork on it from when they bought it 25 years ago or something. And if we had just pulled that out and kind of looked at it together for a minute, it would have helped immensely. And the one thing that they did do really well, I thought, was they had a little Word document with all the bank accounts and the investment accounts and the, trust attorney name and the insurance papers. And so it was just something they typed up, but it at least was an inventory of what there was, which was very helpful.
Yeah, and when I had my dad sit down with the attorney in Iowa, they realized they had accounts in other states, which is problematic when you go through probate. So
Yeah.
they moved that account to back to an institution in Iowa just to kind of make things simpler. So that was wonderful. And before we talked about having the power of attorney for financial is great, but Social Security doesn't recognize that. Wells Fargo doesn't recognize that. Some of the investment firms don't recognize that. So if you've got assets, financial assets with a financial planner or elsewhere, they have their own beneficiary documents that take precedence over anything else, and they don't recognize power of attorney. And so it would go to probate if you don't have those beneficiary designations. And then people that had those set up when they were working and put their first wife's name on there, and they've since divorced and married again, but then all the money's going to the first wife. So you got to look at those. And then for certificates of deposit, CDs, they require a POD, a payable on death, and you need to put a beneficiary on that. So you do have to take financial inventory
Yeah.
of everything that you've got and make sure all the paperwork is done. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare on the other end.
Yeah, thank you. I was shocked by that too with the power of attorney. It took long enough to just get that. And then once I had it, I would go to like Charles Schwab or whatever. And it was a month later after we did all of their paperwork, So yeah, it's that's where all the surprises kept showing up. It's like, how do people know how to do this?
Yeah,
So.
well, I mean, I call it caregiving whack-a-mole, and I do it every day.
Well, you are amazing for doing this because it is, I mean, honestly, we need so many more resources. And not the kind where you just sit on the phone for 2 hours waiting to talk to the long-term care agent and then they give you the runaround. So, I mean, real resources like what you're offering. So can you tell us again about the groups?
Sure. So I mentioned Death Over Dinner. It's a book, but it's also a website, deathoverdinner.org. There's theconversationproject.org. There is, what was the other one? The Five Wishes. So a lot of people have heard of the Five Wishes, and it's good, but I was just in a seminar with an elder law attorney a couple weeks ago, and he said the Five Wishes is great for having the conversations and planning, but if you sign the Five Wishes document that they have in there, then that supersedes your will, and that's really not good from a legal standpoint.
Oh,
So you can use those tools to drive discussions, but again, we want to fall back to the professionals and having an attorney oversee our powers of attorney and our will and all those legal documents. So that was his advice.
okay.
So also for support groups, we've got daughterhood.org, Lisa's Care Connection. We've got Hilarity for Charity. We Are HFC, which is Seth Rogen. They're having their annual comedy extravaganza online. I think this Friday, Valentine's Day.
Wow.
So there's a lot of resources out there, but it is overwhelming. So in my book, I try to kind of contain the overwhelm, and I put it in neat little compartments for you to digest when you're ready, so that you don't have to go crazy, and you can start there, and then again the whole world opens up, and then you can add resources as you find them when you've got some time and space to figure that out.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I know you're doing more speaking on this topic. So if listeners if you're part of a group and you would like a speaker on aging, Nicole would be a great person. And your book can be found everywhere, pretty much.
Everywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, on my website. There's a Kindle version. So yeah, it's available all over the place, and please check it out.
Okay. Well, Nicole, thank you for your time. This has been great. I mean, it's such a huge topic. We could talk about it for days, but hopefully you've given people a little, motivation, frankly, to start organizing. And a lot of this is just organization, is what I found. It's education and organization and conversation. There you go.
Conversation. That's right.
Yeah.
Conversation.
Yeah, and you get those down, and it's going to be much more, it's simpler from the practical aspects, and there's enough to handle with the emotional side of it. So that's the part you don't want interfering with the actual caretaking, is all of this other stuff. So,
But you're not alone. So just build your team and find your people, and you'll get through it.
yeah.
And
Okay.
chocolate helps too.
Chocolate does help, and coffee. Coffee's my go-to. Well, Nicole, again, thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the service that you're providing, and thank you for being on the show. Very helpful, and can't wait to get it out there for people. So. And listeners, thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Money and You show. If you know anybody who can benefit from this show, please, please, please share it. Give us a rating and a review. It really helps us to get the show, expanded out there, and to bring on guests like Nicole, who are just so informative and helpful and helping us round out our financial wellness in new areas. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.